Hello, my creative friends. Dr. Minette Riordan here with another episode of Painting in Your PJs live with Minette. I am not in my PJs this evening. I would love to be, and I will be soon after this call. It's been a very, very full day, and I am just off of a one-to-one coaching call and didn't have time, but it's chilly in the basement, and I am looking forward to going and getting in my nice warm PJs, maybe turning the fireplace on. It is definitely fall in October, and after some really beautiful warm sunny days, the temperatures are plummeting. Welcome to Painting in Your PJs Live. If this is your first time here, I am Dr. Minette Riordan, and this series channel, all of the things is all about art as a creative process, art as a very valuable form of self-expression. I am passionate about art and writing, and I'm also passionate about poetry. If we've never met, I have a doctorate from Stanford University in 19th and 20th century Latin American poetry. I was a specialist in Spanish literature and language and culture. Still love all those things, but my career path took me in a whole lot of different directions. But I'm always looking for ways to bring more poetry into my life and my days, and to bring more Zentangle into my life and my days as well. And one of the ways that I'm doing that this month is through Inktober Tangles, which is an annual challenge of 31 Zentangle patterns. Zentangle is a meditative form of art using repetitive lines and strokes to draw gorgeous patterns. It's one of my favorite things to do, has been since way back in 2010. Again, I'm excited to dive in. I need to play some catch up. I've been on the road the last couple of weeks and I'm a little bit behind. So, my goal for this evening is to do days 8, 9, and 10. We have some really cool patterns. And I'm super excited to share all those patterns with you. And I have all my step outs open on the screen. And I'm going to go ahead and share my other camera with you. And what I'm doing this month is playing with Mary Oliver's book of poetry, Devotions. This is an anthology of her work. I'm a huge fan of her poetry. I think it's very, very accessible and very connected to nature and the natural world and to asking the bigger questions through the lens of nature. And I have a crazy cat running around behind me as usual. So I've been having some fun just sort of randomly flipping through the book, picking out a few poems. There's still lots of pages to be waiting to be tangled. I really loved this. Was a really challenging pattern, but I really enjoyed this one. So there's a couple of examples. And I've been, like I said, just kind of randomly flipping through, definitely looking for a page that has room for drawing as well as the glorious poem itself. So let's try this poem, which is called Morning Glories. Morning Glories by Mary Oliver. Blue and dark blue, rose and deepest rose, white and pink, they are everywhere in the diligent cornfield, rising and swaying in their reliable finery, in the little fling of their bodies, their gear and tackle, all caught up in the cornstalks. The reaper's story is the story of endless work, of work careful and heavy. But the reaper cannot separate them out. There they are in the story of his life, bright, random, useless, year after year, taken with the serious tons, weeds without value, humorous, beautiful weeds. I never thought of morning glories as weeds. I love morning glories. We have gorgeous pink ones here, and they grow on the fences and they do grow up inside all of the sunflowers. Hi, Tori. Welcome. Thank you for joining me live. Judy, great to see you. It's been a while since I saw you. Lovely to have all of you here. Thanks for joining me. So, again, if you're just joining, I am focused on poems and patterns all month long in October and focusing on Inktober Tangles, which is a list of 31 patterns. If you just do a Google search for Inktober Tangles, you will find, or Inktober Tangles 2023, you will find this year's list of prompts. And I am tangling in a book of poetry. I am loving on these poems. I am relishing coming through the book, seeing poems that are familiar and beloved, as well as poems that are new to me. And if you're thinking, heavens no, I can't write in my books, well, I beg to disagree because so often books get tossed aside. They often aren't wanted by libraries or used bookstores and they go into landfills. So I'm going to love on my books. So here were day 6 and day 7, two really fun patterns. This was yesterday morning's video, so you can go back. There's some live videos and some pre-recorded videos as well with the step outs for the first 7 days. So today I have an interesting assortment of patterns to share with you. And I'm going to see if I can blend these patterns all together into something that looks pretty. They're pretty different from each other, and I'm curious to see how it's going to go. But we're going to start with the first pattern, which is a pattern called Bars, B-A-R-Z, by an artist named Alice Hendon, by artist Alice Hendon. And it's kind of a funky pattern. It kind of looks like a wood fence. And I remember a house very near ours where we often walked in the mornings when we were living in Goleta, California, and their fence was covered with morning glories. And so this pattern kind of reminds me of a good old-fashioned wood fence. And I'm going to draw this pattern long down the side of the page of it as if it's kind of in the center of the page here. And we may end up doing different patterns on different poems. We'll see where we get to. But this pattern is going to start with a series of parallel lines. Mine are not particularly even because I'm drawing them pretty long here. And I'm doing this long and skinny, and I think I'm going to do 4 long, skinny parallel lines. And then I'm going to come back and I'm going to divide each of these lines fairly randomly with diagonal and straight lines. So I'm going to first start by just coming here and just from one line to the next, randomly putting some dividing lines as if it were the places in a fence where it's nailed together is what this pattern kind of looks like for me. And then I'm going to come here to this next one and I'm going to go between those initial lines. And I'm going to do that one more time, looking to create a little bit of randomness in the pattern. And there we have the initial part of our first pattern, which is Bars by Alice Hendon. And then to finish this pattern off, we're going to come in and just add 2 little tiny dots or orbs, if you will, above and below the line, above and below the line. And I'm going to do that above and below all of these perpendicular lines here. And it kind of makes this pattern, right? It ends up making it look like boards that are sort of nailed together. I can see why she called the pattern Bars. I love the simplicity of this pattern. Some of the patterns in the 31-day Inktober Tangles challenge this year are quite complex. and I've had to practice them quite a few times to really sort of master them. But for me, true Zentangle lies in this simplicity and that idea of simply one stroke at a time will help us to create something really beautiful. So there's our first pattern, bars, which again kind of reminds me of a fence. And our second pattern, so this is, let me go look at my list here. This is day 8. So pattern for day 9 is called Bailarine by one of my favorite Zentangle teachers, Annie Oken. She's an amazing artist and an amazing Zentangle artist and a fabulous teacher. And so I really love this pattern and I'm wondering how I can incorporate it here. So I maybe want one really flowy one down at the bottom of my design. And then I'm wondering if maybe I could have one peeking out from behind my fence pattern here. So the first step of Bailarine, make sure I have my instructions here where I can see them, is simply to draw an orb. So I'm going to draw one complete version of the pattern first, and then we'll see how I can modify it to fit in some other places in my design. So we're going to draw a nice big orb. And then I'm going to draw kind of a S curve coming off the right side of that orb. And I'm a lefty, so as always, I'm working right to left. If it's easier for you to go the other direction, feel free, doesn't matter. And then I'm going to aura that line and make a petal shape. And then I'm going to continue to add these petal shapes around the edge of this nice big orb. I'm starting a little bit down that edge of that petal so they look like they're stacked and tucked. And in Zentangle, we always turn our tile to make it easier for our hand to draw. Trying to make sure those shadows, those pesky shadows, don't get in the way. So let me brighten up that light a little bit. We need the light on the page, not on me. And I'm just going to continue with that really simple little stacked shape all the way around the edge of that orb. And in this case, I let them get really tiny around the edge. You don't have to let yours get that tiny, but I kind of like the way that looks to have that really tiny pattern. And I will add the shading to these at the end. After I've added all the patterns, there's shading. This one is one of those things that really adds the lovely drama to the patterns. And I'm curious if I turn my page this way and I add a little orb and I add that nice S curve there, and I can imagine that this bailarine is like those morning glories that would grow up the fence. And I want to add some more over on this other side as well. So notice how I continue to turn my page, just going one stroke at a time. So these playful little sort of dancing flowers kind of peeking out from different places in our design. And I think I want one more, so let's add one more on this side over here, kind of up towards the top Maybe we'll have this one flow up that way. So again, that sort of very loose S curve of a shape. Then I'm going to continue and I'm going to let that sort of go in front of that fence line there. And I'm just kind of making it up as I go along. So this one is kind of going to end up looking like it's in front of the fence instead of behind the fence. And I really want this one to flow more out this way. So using those S curves, I'm just going to extend. That one got a little skinny because I didn't turn my page. Make it a little bit my own by just looking like it's peeking out and overflowing from the fence there. So we have our bars, we have our bailarine, and then the next pattern that we have is a really lovely one that was new to me, and I don't know how to pronounce it. It kind of looks like bulldoze, but it's Buldiz, Buldiz, I think. And this is by Stephanie Bordeaux from France. And it says this was a collaboration with another artist as well. And this pattern is so fun. And again, I'm going to add this pattern as if it's kind of floating around and behind our design so that we start to build in a nice little composition here. Everyone keeping up with me if you're drawing along? So this pattern again is one that's simple to draw, has a lot of possibilities for being able to, what do I want to say, to add to it, to embellish it. And it's really simple. So we're going to again go with that same orb shape here. And I'm going to tuck those orbs right here along the edge of my bars. And then I'm going to get to where maybe there's only part of that orb showing because I want to flow that around over here to the other side. So I love the principle in Zentangle of drawing behind. It's how we start to create really lovely layers and more interesting compositions. Maybe we're just going to let that flow a little bit that way. And we're going to let this one flow a little bit this way. So this is going to be my variation on the pattern Buldiz, Buldiz, by Stephanie Bordeaux and Kim Mousson. And forgive me if I'm not saying their names correctly. So this is day 7, day 8, and no, I take that back. Day 8, day 9, and day 10. I'm losing track of the days. It's a lot of prompts to remember, but they are so much fun and I love drawing them. So inside of these bigger orbs, we're going to draw a petal shape. And they're going to be a reflecting petal shape. So I'm going to start here at the top of the orb. And let me get up to my camera and I'm going to zoom in just a little bit more. Trying to see my screen and all my patterns. So I got lots of things moving around. So we're going to draw a nice little petal shape inside our orb. And then we're going to mirror that petal shape. So one is going up and one is floating down. It's kind of a fat teardrop. And I'm just going to repeat that pattern. The fat ends touching and the pointed ends touching. And then we're going to come over here to this side, and we're going to imagine that it's going to start just like we did on that other side. Two petals touching in the center, or 2 points touching between the circles, just alternating that up and down and up and down. That one got a little wonky. See if we can squeeze a couple more into these little petal shapes. So step 1 was to draw our string of orbs. Step 2 was to draw those teardrop shapes inside. I've done a lot of talking today. My voice is feeling a little bit tired. And then inside of these, where the round edges of the petal touch, we're going to draw some little orbs like they're the center of a flower. Make sure I'm still on screen there. We're going to draw 3 little orbs in the center of each of these petal shapes. 1, 2, 3. And I'm going to imagine they're coming out from behind there. So starting at the round edge of our teardrop shape and adding 3 little orbs. I love the ones that look like they're hanging above and below. It's a really sweet pattern. Oh, and I think I'm going to squeeze one little more in there because I can. And then the last step of this pattern, and this is where, or a couple more steps perhaps, where we can really start to have some fun and play with the pattern. So there's 2 more steps, and then we can decide where to go to embellish some of the patterns. Is we're going to come in these open edges of the patterns, and we're just going to add some parallel lines and give these edges some texture. And I'm thinking maybe we're going to squeeze one more up in there. It's much easier when you're learning a new pattern to draw it bigger than smaller, at least in my personal experience. Just taking my time, remembering to breathe. Kind of looking, you start to look at what you've done and think, where else do I want to make some little playful changes? I felt like this guy needed a little bit of fleshing out. And I'm going to turn my page to make it easy to draw. When I start to go fast is when it starts to get messy. So the slower I go, the more I take my time, the more I stay inside the lines, the more that takeoff and landing are neat and not spilling over the edges of the space. And what I love about the art and practice of Zentangle is it reminds me to breathe, to be present in the moment, to simply slow down, to notice where I am, what I'm doing. And now I can decide what else do I want to add to this? Where could I make it a little more playful, a little more fun? I'm almost wanting maybe a couple of more of these bailarine on the page because they feel a little bit scattered and kind of off by themselves. Or do I maybe want to add some leaves? Like, what else can I do to sort of pull this composition together a little bit rather than like I kind of have just mishmashed all these patterns together? And excuse me, one thing I can do is to add a few more orbs coming out of that space between where the orbs connect, just to give it a little more playfulness, a little more whimsy. As if it's sort of blooming and expanding beyond the line of petals themselves. Pardon my sniffles. I have had a cold the last few weeks and I'm having a hard time just kicking it. All right, so I'm feeling like the things feel a little bit disconnected, and I think I want to add maybe a couple of more of these to fill it in. And I'm looking, do I want to add another chain of these? I don't think so. That feels really good. I like how that looks. But these guys are looking a little bit disconnected, and I kind of like the way they're sort of peeking out from behind the fence, and I'm wondering, could I just stack them? And what if I made this one go the opposite direction? I'm going to turn that page. So once you have the basic shape of things, you can really play with that shape, stretch it, make it go a different direction, make it a little bit more your own. All right, that one got a little messy there, but I'm not going to worry about it. I actually really like the blackening around the orb there. That appeals to me, so I'm just going to go ahead and add that to the other one. So when I look at this composition, I realize what's missing is contrast. I really love patterns that add a lot of contrast to the piece, and this piece does not have a lot of those darker black areas in it. Anybody drawing along with me? Any questions? How are you guys doing? Thanks for joining me live as always. And if you're catching the replay, thanks for watching the replay as well. And I'm going to come in with some line work and just continue to create a little more contrast. If you're new to the channel, I encourage you to subscribe and then click that little bell as well. You get notified whenever I go live or add new content to the channel. And if you're enjoying what I'm up to, click that like button. But I love hearing from you, having some of that interaction. See how just adding that little bit of contrast to those flowers sort of starts to pull the piece together, creates a little more interest. These were a lot of sort of very white open patterns, and they needed a little bit more whimsy and playfulness. And I tend to draw really fast, Tori, so thank you for saying that. And my daughter always says I go too fast, right? And I think it is that good reminder to slow down. And, the patterns are kind of tricky, right? And so I think the more that we take our time, the more we learn to enjoy the process. So always that good reminder to kind of just slow ourselves down a little bit. And I'm going to tuck one more of these in here, bringing it all the way around. And I love when you learn a new pattern and then you figure out the fun ways to kind of make them your own. So that feels a little more whimsical and playful. And now these two kind of look like wings on either side. So we're going to want to add something to kind of break that up and something to kind of fill in some of the spaces. And of course, I'm going to turn to some of my most favorite tangle patterns that I tend to draw over and over again. But I'm also looking at these, maybe thinking just some simple leaf shapes would be super fun. And let me put some thought into what do I want to add here, or maybe some henna drum. I really love henna drum. The problem is there's so many fun patterns that we could add. And sometimes we just have to sit for a second and think about where do we want to go next. All right. I'm thinking there's a fun pattern that is called Catkin, Catkin. I can't remember who created this pattern. It might be a Zentangle official pattern, but it's a fun little willowy pattern. So I think maybe we'll add a couple of those in here and see if we can get this growing a little bit more. So we're going to start with one stem, two stem, maybe a little stem tucked back in here as well. And then we're going to add just some little rounded curved edges. And then we're just going to lightly finish those off. Kind of, they remind me of pussy willows. So they have one sort of dark edge. And there's probably official step outs to this. I'm kind of making this one up as I go, but it definitely is a pattern that I really love, the sort of playfulness of it. And I do tend to have a real preference for the more botanical inspired patterns. And it just needs that little sort of playfulness in there. And some of the lines I'm leaving kind of open, some of the lines I'm leaving, sort of closed. It gives it a little bit of lightness. And look how much just adding that one simple pattern filled out this space and starts to pull things together and make them feel a little bit less disconnected on the page. And it looks like the line in the poem where it talks about they're all caught up, the morning glories are all caught up in the corn stalks. So it's like we have this fence line here and we have all these things growing and caught up in the corn stalks. So I can see the sort of symmetry here between the design and the lines of the poem. And these do look very much like weeds, right? Taken with the serious tons, weeds without value, humorous, beautiful weeds. I love her perspective on thinking about things differently, right? Like, how can we find the humor in the weeds. For example, in the spring when the dandelions are persistent in my front yard, and I seem to be spending inordinate amounts of time weeding the dandelions and trying to stop them from growing over into our neighbor's gorgeous garden. I'm not so humorous about them. And the bunnies love them. The bunnies love them. So there's some benefit there. So another little catkin, and all of a sudden we have this gorgeous line of things all sort of flowing together, starting to pull the whole composition together. So I'm going to continue to add a couple of more of these, and then I'm going to go ahead and add some shading to the whole piece and see what kind of magic we can create with the shading. And how, as a kid, we blew those dandelion seeds everywhere. I still, Tori, love to blow those dandelion seeds absolutely everywhere, for sure. And if you're joining me live, stop by and leave me a note in the comments, or if you're catching the replay, say hi. Let me know you stopped by. Okay, those guys are getting kind of big. Let me know if you have any questions or anything doesn't make any sense. So this is Inktober Tangles days 8, 9, and 10. Almost caught up. By tomorrow morning I will do a couple more patterns and feel like I am caught up again. I think today is the 11th, so tomorrow I'll have to do 11 and 12 and get myself, and maybe even work ahead a little bit, get myself back on track. Okay, I'm really digging how that one fun little pattern has sort of pulled the whole thing together. And so let's take this one up and out and behind. And if you're following along, you might notice that you were drawing the same patterns as I am, but your compositions ended up looking very different than mine did by the time you got yours all put together. And that's perfect. They don't need to look exactly the same. Maybe you're just practicing the step outs on a piece of paper or a tile. My cats are over here. They have been crazy all day. I think it must be they know the colder weather is coming, and they have been running around and wrestling and just generally creating a lot of mayhem today. So there we have a very simple sort of organic composition that kind of echoes this idea of morning glories growing up a fence line with our tangle pattern bars, our tangle pattern boldies, and bailarine. And I just noticed as I was saying them out aloud together that they all start with B's, and nothing else is really alphabetical in the process. It's interesting that this one ended up being alphabetical. So this was the pattern bars, bailarine. This was by Alice Hendon. I always like to honor the originator and creator of the patterns. Bailarine by Annie Oken. And Boldies by Stephanie Bordeaux. And so these are days 8, 9, and 10 of Inktober Tangles. And I like to write down the names of the patterns and who the artists are, because when I flip back through this book, I not only have all this beautiful poetry to read, but I also have a record of a variety of different tangle patterns that I might want to think, oh, how could I draw that? I was looking back through another book of poetry that I had tangled and realizing there's some lovely patterns in there that I forget about because there's so many. And I'm going to add my chop. My chop is simply my initials or my artist signature. And I always like to add my chop and the date on which this was created, or at least the year. And it's fun to go back and see the things that I created in the past and to see how I've evolved or changed or what stayed the same or what patterns that I still love. So now I'm going to come in with a pencil. This is just a number 2 pencil, and I'm going to add some shading. What I've noticed about working in the book of poems on the newsprint is pretty thin, right? It's pretty thin, and the graphite doesn't spread super well, so I'm just sort of, mindful of that as I go. I'm going to add a little bit more shading around the center of these orbs and maybe between some of the petals. And shading in Zentangle is always about creating drama in contrast, not worrying about where the light is coming from. And we can add a little bit of roundness to those orbs as well. And I'm going to add graphite to the whole piece, and then I will come back again with my smudge stick or tortillon and add some shading to these. I'm going to leave the catkin as they are. They're quite lovely, and I think they have enough interest that they really don't need anything added to them. When I'm looking at these, I really want the center of the petal to stand out, so I think I'm going to shade where I drew those parallel lines. And I'm not over shading. It's easy to add graphite. It's really difficult to take graphite away from a piece. So start off lightly, and you can always add more graphite as you go. And so this bars pattern is really interesting. It's a fence line, and so I want to kind of maybe just give it that, little bit of a grungy look. So I'm going to shade along each of these bars, if you will, here. And then I'm also going to shade just below each of these lines, not above and below, but just below each of these lines. And maybe we'll bring in a little shading along the edges as well. And I'm going to come back with that tortillon or smudge stick. And I'm going to soften up all of this graphite. So these lines look pretty harsh at the moment. And the magic happens when we start to come in and soften up all of those lines. And to me, it's always what makes a piece really feel finished is this final step of softening all that graphite. So I'm just taking the end here of my stick, and wherever I have laid down that pencil, I'm just going to take that smudge stick and I'm going to soften up that graphite. I don't want everything to be gray. I still want there to be lots of white space, especially on our bars, our fence pattern here. but this is going to help it give a little bit more of that sort of fence post look to it. So you can see the difference between not shaded, not smudged, and smudged, at how that graphite has added texture and contrast. To all the parts of our design. It's interesting, it's not as dark on the screen as it is in real life. And I'll just come in, and I don't need to do too much around the edges of this. I just want to smooth it out where I didn't completely, excuse me, fill in all of the graphite. And once I get that first layer down, I can decide if I want to go in and darken it up a little bit more. Sorry about that. Got a tickle in my throat. Diego, Georgia. Georgia, no kitties. All right, Georgia says yes, kitties. So what I'm curious about here is almost looks like these are starting to get a little bit of a rounding because we have the dark between and the white in the centers. And maybe I want to exaggerate that a little bit more around the edges. And I wish you could see Georgia. She is, I don't know if my camera will move. She's like she's literally laying on the table right in front of where I'm drawing. Like she's pushing on the book. She's so helpful. Like she's literally lying on my arm, wanting to be in the middle of absolutely everything. All right, my friends, thank you so much for joining me. There are days 8, 9, and 10 of Inktober Tangles alongside of Mary Oliver's wonderful poem, Morning Glories. A whole new perspective on weeds and growth and beautiful things. Thank you, Tori. Thank you, Judy. Thanks for joining me live. Thanks for catching the replay. Remember to hit that like button if you enjoyed what I shared. I will be back live tomorrow morning at 7 a.m. Mountain Time for days 11, 12, and we are going to keep on keeping on all month long with poems and patterns with Mary Oliver and our Zentangle practice. Have a beautiful rest of your evening. I'm off to have some dinner and get into my PJs. Thank you all so much, and I'll see you soon. Bye bye.